So Jefferson is just building on this previously existing tradition. Now, none of this gets taught to anybody in school. None of it gets taught. Instead, you're guilty of treason if you want to uphold the Constitution. I mean, that's how perverse it's become. So the federal government violates the Constitution. Well, that's just an unfortunate thing. But if a state tries to resist it, oh, that's just unthinkable. What kind of perverse priorities are these? What's happening? What's happened to us? What are we allowed to happen to us? Let me give you a little bit of an overview of how these principles were used in American history. Here's what will happen if you crack open an American history textbook. They'll say, they'll mention the Virginia-Kentucky resolutions very, very briefly. In fact, I love the way Levinson dealt with it in his Texas article. New York Times recently attacked nullification too. So here's what he says in his article. Well, let's see. So first we've got, none of the states supported it. And secondly, we have, this is my favorite part, Jefferson in the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 appeared to suggest, those are his words, appeared to suggest that the states could resist the federal government. I mean, really? Appeared to suggest? You've got to read these things for yourselves and say, appeared to suggest? I mean, what the word? It'd be like the Declaration of Independence appeared to suggest that we ought to withdraw from Great Britain, but, you know, it's kind of up in the air. So the standard thing you'll get in the textbook is, all right, so you got these Virginia-Kentucky resolutions, and then you have South Carolina in 1832 to 1833 nullifying some tariffs, and that was obviously all about slavery. And that's it. That's it. It's only been used by evil people who hate America and who hate black people and just want to oppress people. Yeah. Because the federal government has never oppressed anybody. It has a pristine human rights record, right? Well, here's 1809, here's the Massachusetts legislature responding to the embargo that Thomas Jefferson imposed, which was forbidding all American ships from leaving for any foreign port anywhere in the world. This was, of course, wreaking havoc on the maritime economy of New England. And their argument was that the power to regulate commerce is not the power to annihilate it utterly. So the Massachusetts legislature, early 1809, here's Massachusetts, who didn't like the principles of 98. They don't like interposition. Supreme Court will decide all these things. Huh, okay. Here's the Massachusetts legislature. The embargo is in many respects unjust, oppressive, and unconstitutional, and not legally binding on the citizens of this state. It would be derogatory, they went on, to the honor of the Commonwealth to presume that it, namely Massachusetts, is unable to protect its subjects against all violations of their rights by peaceable and legal remedies. While this state maintains its sovereignty and independence, all the citizens can find protection against outrage and injustice in the strong arm of the state government. In Connecticut, February 1809, the governor, Jonathan Trumbull, spoke this way. And imagine how popular a governor would be if he spoke this way today. Whenever our national legislature is led to overleap the prescribed bounds of their constitutional powers, upon the state legislatures in great emergencies devolves the arduous task. It is their right, it becomes their duty to interpose their protecting shield between the right and liberty of the people and the assumed power of the general government. The Connecticut legislature heartily endorsed this statement of its governor, and permit me to read this at length, it is worth hearing. Resolved that to preserve the Union and support the Constitution of the United States, it becomes the duty of the legislatures of the states in such a crisis of affairs vigilantly to watch over and vigorously to maintain the powers not delegated to the United States but reserved to the states respectively, or to the people, and that a due regard to this duty will not permit this assembly to assist or concur in giving effect to the aforesaid unconstitutional act passed to enforce the embargo. Resolved that this assembly highly approve of the conduct of His Excellency the Governor in declining to designate persons to carry into effect, by the aid of military power, the Act of the United States enforcing the embargo, and that his letter addressed to the Secretary for the Department of War, containing his refusal to make such designation, be recorded in the public records of this state as an example to persons who may hold places of distinguished trust in this free and independent republic. Resolved that persons holding executive offices under this state are restrained by the duties which they owe this state from affording any official aid or cooperation in the execution of the act aforesaid. Now again, I didn't read that, and I didn't read that in any history textbook that I had. We've already quoted from the Rhode Island legislature. Then we have the issue in the War of 1812 about the militia. The Constitution makes clear the militia can be federalized, can be called up by the U.S. government only for particular reasons, not for any reason whatsoever. So to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrections, and to repel invasions, those three things. And it was the opinion, therefore, of the New England states that calling up the militia to invade Canada was not included in that description. And they argued that the power to make this determination rested ultimately in the hands of the governors who presided over the state militias. And so during the War of 1812, we get, in fact, Massachusetts judges concluding that this power of determining whether these exigencies held or not rested with the states. And thus, as this power, and I'm quoting Massachusetts judges, is not delegated to the United States by the federal Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, it is reserved to the states respectively, and from the nature of the power, it must be exercised by those with whom the states have respectively entrusted the chief command of the militia. The Connecticut legislature declared that the conduct of His Excellency the Governor in refusing to order the militia of this state into the service of the United States on the requisition of the Secretary of War meets with the entire approbation of this Assembly. Timothy Pickering, a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, said, "How are the powers reserved to the states respectively or to the people to be maintained except by the respective states judging for themselves and putting their negative on the usurpations of the general government?" And we can go on. There are numerous other states who had this objection, and some of them, by this time, of course, James Madison is the president. And there's at least one state that pointed out, hey, James Madison, you remember your earlier principles from the Virginia resolutions? That's all we're up to here. We're just appealing to those. Now, it's interesting to note, incidentally, that military conscription was seriously entertained during the War of 1812, toward the end. I hope I don't need to tell a gathering like this that typically, conservatives used to understand that military conscription is not conservative. I mean, like Russell Kirk is the most important intellectual in the whole conservative movement. And he said conscription is slavery. So we're not going to dismiss Russell Kirk, I hope, as an anti-American leftist. Kirk and a lot of the other early conservatives held this basic view. And so did Daniel Webster. And so as the war is going on and toward the end, when it looks like conscription is being entertained, Daniel Webster, who later represented Massachusetts in both the House and the Senate, but originally was a representative from New Hampshire, got up and gave one of his most memorable speeches, and he said this: "Where is it written in the Constitution? In what article or section is it contained? That you may take children from their parents, and parents from their children, and compel them to fight the battles of any war in which the folly or the wickedness of government may engage in." And here's what his proposed remedy was. What if the Conscription Bill passes? In that case, he said, it would be the solemn duty of the state governments to protect their own authority over their own militia and to interpose between their citizens and arbitrary power. And then he spoke about that if this should ever occur, that he shall exhort his constituents to exercise in their state their unquestionable right of providing for the security of their own liberties. Now, the Conscription Bill didn't pass, but the federal government did enact a bill for the enlistment of minors. That's just super. Well, there were some legislators who thought that, okay, the government conscripting minors without the consent of the parents might be, a little over the line, right? I mean, we do believe in the family, presumably, right? So the legislature of Connecticut passed what was called an Act to Secure the Rights of Parents, Masters, and Guardians, and declared the federal government's measure as, quote, repugnant to the spirit of the Constitution of the United States and an unauthorized interference with the laws and rights of this state. The bill required judges to release on habeas corpus any minors who had been enlisted without the consent of their parents. Anyone trying to do so who attempted to remove such a minor from Connecticut was subject to fine and imprisonment, and Massachusetts followed suit. Now, we can continue going through American history. In the 1820s, there were fights with the Second Bank of the United States, and in the context of that, the state legislature of Ohio, in 1820, by a vote of 59 to 7 approved this declaration. Resolved by the General Assembly of the State of Ohio, that in respect to the powers of the governments of the several states which compose the American Union and the powers of the federal government, this General Assembly do recognize and approve the doctrines asserted by the legislatures of Virginia and Kentucky in their resolutions of November and December 1798, and January 1800, which was Madison's follow-up report defending the Virginia resolutions from criticisms. And it went on to say, we do consider that these principles have been recognized and adopted by a majority of the American people.